Hi there and welcome to Code Framer. So let us continue further to learn about for loops in Python. So I hope that you have seen the last few videos where we understood about the while loop. And I'm sure that if you have seen the last few videos, then you would have understood how basically loop works in Python and how we can use these looping concept in order to solve certain problems. And also I have clearly and in detail explained about how basically a specific action is performed when multiple loops are being carried out, and also how a loop can be broken using a condition in a while loop. So if you have clearly understood how while loop works, then I'm absolutely sure that working with for loop will be even more easier for you. So now let us try to understand how for loop works with a very basic example. So let me create a very basic data structure, which is a list. So we can create a list and say we store few string characters, let's say A, B, and C. So now if we want to simply print these items which is stored in the list one by one by running a for loop, then simply we can write for I in list and print I. So it is as simple as that. So if you want to loop through all the items in a list and if you want to perform certain action, then simply you can write for I in list, where for is a keyword which we have to use in order to create a for loop, and then we can declare the variable which we will use in order to represent the items which are stored in the iterable. In this case our iterable is the list, because we are going to loop through the items of the list and perform certain actions, and that is why here the list will be known as the iterable. And in order to represent all the items of that particular iterable, we are declaring this variable which is I, and inside the loop we can use this I in order to perform action, and in the I variable we will have the item of the list one by one. So for example, when the for loop is looping through the first item of the list, then I will contain the value A, and when the for loop executes the second time, then the item that will be stored in I will be B, and the third time it will be C. So if we print this particular output, you can see here that A, B, and C are getting printed. So which means that this for loop ran through all the items inside this list and it printed all those items one by one. So this is how basically a for loop works. So I hope that this concept is clear, that how we can basically use a for loop in order to loop through a particular data structure. So now let us take one more example. Say we have a string. So we can create a string variable and just store maybe some letters. We can say A, B, C, D. And now if we want to loop through this string using a for loop, then all we have to write is for I in string and print I. So again, as you can see that we can basically loop through string items as well using the for loop. So if you print this output, then let us just comment this one out. And if you print this output, you can see that all these strings are getting printed one by one. So basically we can use the for loop in order to loop through strings as well. And now let us take an example of a dictionary. So let us create a variable dict, and we can store letters as the dictionary key, and we can maybe store a numeric value as the value. So now let us create another key which is B and which stores the value of 2, and similarly we can create one more key which is C and it will store the value of 3. So now if you want to loop through all the keys in this particular dictionary, then you can write for I in dict dot keys and then simply print I. So if you do this, let me first comment this one. So now if you print this, then as you can see that we are getting all the keys one by one. So you can also use the for loop to loop through all the keys in a dictionary. And similarly, if you want to loop through all the values, then you can simply write dict.values here and you can execute this one. And as you can see, we are getting all the values here as well, one by one. So basically you can loop through any kind of data structure using a for loop and you can perform various actions. So here the action that we are performing is to just print the value that is being fetched in the for loop. But similarly, if you want to, for example, add +5 in all the values that are stored in this dictionary, so you can simply print this one and you can see here that all the values that are being fetched from the dictionary is getting added with 5. So similarly, you can perform any kind of action using a for loop on all the items which is stored in a particular data structure. So this is the main use of for loop, where we can loop through the items which are stored in a data structure and then we can perform various actions. And one more thing is you can use conditional statements inside for loop. So basically it's not about just conditional statements, but you can use any kind of statements inside a for loop to perform certain action, because all you are doing using a for loop is repeating your actions, and action in itself you can write any kind of code. So there is no limitation for you that you could use only certain kind of statements inside a for loop. No, it's not like that. You can use any kind of statement, be it conditional conditional statement, be it creating more looping statements, which means nested looping statements inside a for loop. So basically you can create a while loop inside a for loop, or you can create another for loop inside a for loop. So you can write any kind of statement inside a for loop, just how you were able to do it in the while loop. You can use or write any kind of statement inside a for loop as well. So say for example, we just write a conditional statement here where we can say if I is equal to 2, then maybe print I am 2, something like that. So now if you print this one, sorry, I made one mistake, it should be always double equals. A single equal operator is always an assignment operator, always remember. So whenever you are intending to use equal operator in the conditional statement, just remember that you have to give the comparison operator, and comparison operator is always double equals. So now if we execute this statement, then as you can see here in the result, that when I was equal to 2, when I came to this value while looping through this dictionary, it printed this statement here. So similarly, you can use any kind of conditional statement inside your for loop and perform various actions based on certain condition. Now let me give few more examples on how we can use for loop. So say for example, you want to loop through this list not based on the items which is stored in the list, but based on the index of this particular list. Then how you can basically write that for loop. So let us go here. So earlier we used to write for I in list, right? So basically what will happen here is the I will fetch the value of the item which is stored in the list in this case, but we want to loop using the index. So basically we want to fetch the index of the item which is stored in the list. So in that case, what we can do is we can use the range function. So if we can write here range and then we give the length of the list. So now this I will get the index of this list. Okay, so I'm sure that this must be a little confusing. So let me explain what's going on in here. So as I mentioned earlier, that we want to fetch the indexes of these items and we want to loop through these items using the indexes. So what are our indexes? The first index is 0, then we have 1, and then we have 2, right? Now we need to loop from 0 to 2. So in that case, we can use the range function. So what this range function does, if you're new to Python, then I'm sure that that must be the question in your mind. So if you print range of say 0 to 3, which is the length of this particular list. So we have 3 items stored in this list. So the length of this list will be 3. So if you print range of 3, then let's see what result we are getting. So we are getting a range from 0 to 3, which means that we are getting a starting point and we are getting an end point using this range function. And if we loop through this range function, which has a starting point and an end point, then it will simply give us these values, which is 0, 1, 2. So now say for example, we loop through this range function, which has the value as 3 as an argument. And if you print I, then if you see in the result, we are getting the value 0, 1 and 2. Now you must be thinking that why 3 is not getting printed here. It is because range function will always exclude the endpoint. So here when we give 3, it is basically taking 3 as the endpoint. So it will by default take 0 as the start point. So it is starting from 0 and then it will go to 1 and then 2 and it will exclude 3. So that is one of the functionality of range function. It is its internal functionality that it will always ignore, or it will never consider the endpoint. So always remember that, because this concept will really help you in understanding a lot of sorting algorithms in future. Range function is one of the very important functions in Python, because when you will be learning about data structures and algorithm, and especially sorting algorithms, you will use range function a lot. So remember this concept, that when you are using the range function, it will always consider 0 as the start point as default. But yes, you can definitely manually set the start point if you want, but if you leave it as it is without giving any start point, then it will always consider 0 as the start point and it will never consider the end point. So it will always ignore the end point. So I hope that now you have good understanding about the range function. So now let us go back to our example. So here as you can see that we have written for I in range length of list, which means the length of list is 3, right? So here you could imagine that it will take the length of list output as 3 here. So basically this is what we have written. So now let us go back to what we wrote earlier, which is length of list. So if you print I now, it will basically give us 3 numbers, which is 0, 1 and 2. And if you remember, these numbers represent our current indexes in the list, right? So which means we can use this variable I now to loop through this list and fetch our list items. So if we write print list of I, then basically we will get our items, right? So if we execute this now, so we are getting ABC. So I hope that now it is clear for you that how you can loop through a data structure using the index of the data structure. So in the case of list, we can use the range function and we can loop through all the items in a list using its indexes. So having understood all these concepts, now let us try to solve the same problem that we solved in the last few videos, where we understood about the while loop, which was to print a particular pattern. right? We printed a pattern of stars where in the first row we had one star, in the second row we had two stars, and then in the third row we had three stars, and similarly in the fourth and the fifth row. So this was our pattern which we printed using a while loop in the last video. So now let us try to solve this using a for loop. So since you have now understood about the concept of a for loop and how it works, I would want you to pause the video for a moment and just think about the solution which you might have already figured out using a while loop in the last video. Think about how we can implement that using a for loop. The concept is going to be very same, and in fact the code is going to be extremely similar to the last video, but yes, there will be certain changes. So again, the same thing, that first we have to loop through all the rows in this pattern, which is from row 0 to row 4. And then in each row, we have to print the number of stars, which is same as the row itself, right? If it is row 1, then just print 1 star. If it is row 2, just print 2 stars, right? It's like that. So that's going to be our logic. So we can write for I in range 5. So basically we want to loop 5 times in order to print all the rows in our pattern, right? Because we have 5 rows in our pattern. So we can say range 5. And if you remember that when we give range 5, the range function will start looping from 0 and it will loop till 4 and it will ignore 5. So which means that we have in total 5 number of loops here. So using this for loop, we can now loop through all our rows in the pattern. Now our next focus should be how we can print the star inside each row. So for that we can create one more loop. So we can say for j in range I plus 1. So here think for a moment that what I have written. Before knowing it from me, pause the video for a moment and think that why I have written range I plus 1. So in the second loop, we are saying for j in range I plus 1. And the reason for that is, if you remember, here the I will start from 0 and it will end at 4, which means I basically is representing the row 1 as 0. So I cannot use 0 value to represent row 1. I want it to be 1, right? So that is the reason why I'm saying that when I'm looping through the first row, I want it to be 0 plus 1. That is what I'm basically representing here. And then it will become 1. So which means that for j in row 1, we can print star and we can give end as an empty space, because in print statement this end is always a new line as a default. We don't want the end of our print statement to be a new line. We want it to be an empty space so that we are able to print all the stars in a single row. So now let us see what is happening here. So when the value of I is 0, the loop will go to the next loop, which is our nested loop. And here we will say for j in range 0 plus 1, which is 1, which means that at row 1 only single star will get printed, because j is going to loop only once, because we have range 1 here. So j will get printed only once. Now in the second loop, or in the second I value, which will be 1. So first value was 0 and now the value of I will become 1. So in that case, it will come to the nested loop, and here 1 plus 1 will become 2, which means that now j will loop twice and star will get printed twice. And similarly, now it will go again back to parent for loop, and here the value of I will become 2. So first it was 0, then it was 1, and now it is 2. And now it will go to the nested loop, and here 2 plus 1 will become 3. So now print value will get printed 3 times in the third row. So I hope that this concept is getting clear. So now here we need to give one more print statement in order to break the line for each row. So if we give a print statement here, then whenever a new I value is getting fetched from the parent loop, a line break will be executed in the console, which will basically break these lines for each row in the pattern. So that is why we can just give this print statement here. So you can see here that I am giving this print statement inside this main parent loop, because I want the line break to happen in each row, because I represents row for us. So for each row this line break should happen. But in case of the column, I'm not giving the line break. Instead of that, I am mentioning end as the empty space, because when column is getting printed, I don't want these stars to get broken and go to the next line. I want it to be in the same row, and that is why I have mentioned end as an empty space here. So now if we print this block of code, then as you can see here that we are getting our pattern sound and clear. So I hope that you have understood this concept. Let me explain to you one more time so that you are absolutely clear on what is going on in here. So first we are looping through a range of 5 numbers, which will be from 0 to 4. So always remember that the range function will always exclude the endpoint. So the first value for the I will be 0, and then we go to our nested loop where we are going to loop using the j variable, and the range will get the value of I, which means here for the first column, value of I will become 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So which means that we are going to loop only once in the first row, and that is why print statement will execute and a single star will get printed in the console. Then this print statement gets executed, so the line gets broken and it goes to the second row. Now again I will fetch the value of 1. So remember earlier we had 0 value for the first row. Now for the second row it will take the value as 1, and then it will go to the nested loop where the value of this I will be 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. So the range function will have 2 as the value here. So which means that now the internal loop will run twice. So the star will get printed twice in the same row. And since we have end given as an empty space here, the line will not get broken. So the second star will also get printed in the same row. So once both the stars are printed, then again a new row will be created because of this print statement. Now the loop will go to the parent loop, and again now the value of I will become 2. So remember earlier we had 0 value, 1 value, and now the 2 value. So now the interpreter will go to the nested loop or our internal loop, and then value of I is 2 now. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So which means that our internal loop will run thrice for the third row. So print statement will print the star 3 times in the third row, and then again the print statement will get executed and the interpreter will go to the parent loop, and this time the value will be 3. So similarly the execution will continue for the value 3 and 4 for our I, and once all the values are executed in the for loop, in the parent for loop, which is from 0 to 4, it will continue to execute the internal code of the parent for loop, and it will keep printing the stars in each row. So I hope that this concept is clear. So basically this is how you can use a for loop in order to perform various actions on a collection of items and to solve different problems. So you could imagine that how powerful for loops are, and definitely since you're going to use Python as a regular language in future, you will be using for loop a lot, for loops and while loops. So I think now the basic concept of a for loop must be clear in your head. So now you can solve many different problems using for loop yourself so that you are absolutely comfortable using the for loop in future. So it is not just important to understand the concept, but it is also important that you get it naturally next time when you are solving a particular problem. For now, you know what is a for loop and what is its concept, but for you to get it naturally next time, or for you to feel absolutely comfortable using a for loop next time while solving a problem or creating a solution, you should practice with for loop a little more. So you can print different patterns. Like for example, you can print this pattern. These are some of the very basic patterns that I'm sure you would be interested to solve. So you can solve this pattern where we can create a square using a star symbol. Okay, basically you can create a square here, and similarly you can use a for loop and create an inverted pattern where in the first row you will have 5 stars, and then in the second row you will have 4 stars, and in the in the third one you will have 3 stars, and the same last fourth and fifth row. So you can print this inverted pattern using a for loop. You can print this square pattern using a for loop. Similarly, try to find more and more problems online where you can use a for loop and solve the problem. This will give you enough practice so that next time when you're thinking about a solution or solving a problem, using a for loop will come extremely naturally to you. So that is very important. So I leave it here. I hope that this concept is clear and you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed learning for loops, and this is going to help you a lot. So I appreciate that you have taken the time to learn this concept in this video. So thanks a lot for watching. I will come up with the next topic in Python in the next video, and until then, take care and happy learning.